This episode was brought to you by Skillshare.
Hey everyone, I am Jess Keating and you're watching Animalogic Second Nature.
Understandings are first gained by seeing things at first hand, watching, experiencing.
Metamorphosis.
Metamorphosis, when one thing becomes another.
Metamorphosis.
When we talk about growth, we usually think of growing up.
Metamorphosis.
But the long road of growth is not just up. If it were, it would mean that this little baby would someday look like this.
This process is a truly mind-boggling phenomenon shared by over 65% of all animal species on Earth, the majority of which are insects.
Insects develop from young to adult in 3 different ways. They all start from eggs, of course. Silverfish illustrate the first method. The young are much like the adult except in size. There is no metamorphosis.
So many insects undergo metamorphosis that it would be easier to count those that don't than those that do. 2 common insects you may be unlucky enough to see regularly that don't metamorphosize are silverfish and bristletails.
There are 2 broad categories of metamorphosis, complete and incomplete.
Incomplete metamorphosis, which means no basic change in structure from nymph to adult.
Incomplete metamorphosis is when an insect changes in several stages called instars or nymphs, depending on the species.
These changes are often very gradual, and some species can have up to 15 nymphal stages.
They start as eggs, then they hatch, and at the end of each stage they molt. During molting, the insect separates from their cuticle, their equivalent to skin. They begin to secrete materials that will form their new cuticle, while their old one eventually disintegrates and they break out of it. They're soft at first, but their new cuticle hardens up within a few hours.
During this process, they gain new features.
Cockroaches and crickets, for example, gain wings through molting, and their sexual organs only become functional after their final molt.
The young, called a nymph, has no wings. It gets wings in its final molt.
Because of this gradual development, adult insects that undergo incomplete metamorphosis tend to look like their babies, but with extra features, like a Pokemon's final form, except for maybe Magikarp.
Complete metamorphosis is where things start to get really interesting.
Complete metamorphosis shows 4 distinct changes from egg to adult. The cycle starts when, for example, an adult Mexican bean beetle lays a cluster of eggs.
Species that undergo complete metamorphosis go through 4 distinct phases: egg, larva, pupa, and adult.
Each one of these life stages serves a specific purpose. The goal of a larva is to eat as much as possible so that it can grow and develop, while the goal of an adult is to reproduce. In fact, in some species, the adults don't even eat. They spend their entire adult lives trying to reproduce, fueled by the energy stored by their larval stage.
Larvae hatch from the eggs. The larval stage is mainly a feeding stage.
Goliath beetles can live for up to 2 years in the larval stage and get particularly swole in preparation to pupate.
Now this one is 33 grams exactly now.
The adults generally lay their eggs near a food source so that when they hatch, the larvae can quickly begin to stuff themselves with as much food as they can eat.
As they grow, they molt, and once they've developed enough, they pupate.
When all of the black widow's eggs have been eaten, the maggots pupate.
During this stage, they develop into their final form, adults. Some insects, like moths, form cocoons out of silk or poop to protect themselves as they go through this radical change. Butterflies, on the other hand, don't form protective cocoons, and instead their exterior forms a hard chrysalid. And like butterflies, they can be breathtaking. Some even look like gold.
The chrysalis is a resting stage, during which the animal changes into a beautiful butterfly.
During this stage, the larvae release enzymes that dissolve their own tissue.
Once broken down, the adult structures begin to form out of tiny clusters of cells called imaginal discs. These imaginal discs are cells that are present when the larvae are born. They are attached to their epidermis by a thin stalk and remain dormant throughout their larval stage. Though once awoken during the pupal stage, they go to work.
What they're able to do is almost too fantastical to be true.
Once they're activated, the cells begin to divide very quickly to make more cells, eventually building entire structures like wings in just a few days.
Even more fantastical is the fact that these elements are developed independently of one another and then attached later.
So a wing may be grown in one area and then moved into place, somewhat like assembling a car. You don't have to build each part where it's going to end up. So a leg could be formed near the head and then moved down to its thorax.
Even more fantastical is the fact that some butterflies can remember things from when they were caterpillars.
A caterpillar is a growing up stage in the life of a moth or butterfly.
A group of scientists did an experiment where they would emit a particular smell and then administer a small shock to a caterpillar. The caterpillar would learn to avoid the smell in the future. But the surprising thing is that after the caterpillars went through their metamorphosis, in which their bodies are completely dissolved and reformed, when presented with the same smell, the adult moths would freak out. This suggests that parts of their nervous system have continuity through their radical body change.
By the way, do you know how to tell a butterfly from a moth? Well, the best way is to look closely at the animal's antennae, or feelers.
Roughly 98% of all insects undergo metamorphosis, but it wasn't always this way.
For millions of years, ametabolic animals, or animals that don't metamorphosize, reigned supreme. These early insects hatched as miniature versions of the adults, but that all started to change around 300 million years ago when a new player emerged.
These new insects hatched with bodies that were radically different than their adult forms.
Not only did they look different, but they behaved differently too. They ate different food and occupied different niches. Soon, they started to change their shape to best exploit the resources. For example, some newborns began to look more like worms in order to dig better and find meals underground, while the adults became larger and evolved tools for defense against predators, better vision for flying, color vision to find the tastiest food, and so on.
Since insect generations are so short, new adaptations can evolve very quickly.
Eggs began to hatch earlier and earlier. These pre-nymphs got better and better at fending for themselves and didn't need to stay in the egg as long. These became known as larvae. Though despite how adept these new larvae were at finding food and surviving outside the egg, they still lacked the sexual organs they needed to reproduce. Instead of a slow, gradual transformation, gaining sexual organs as they matured, these insects underwent brief periods of accelerated change, what we now know as pupation. With their various life stages able to dominate different niches, ametabolic insects, who could only specialize in one area and had to compete with their own young for survival, were pushed out of the market.
Insects aren't alone. Amphibians and some fish also undergo metamorphosis.
Frogs, salamanders, and all other amphibians can live on land, but they lay their eggs in the water.
The adult toad spends most of his life on land, but when spring comes, he returns to the pond for the mating season.
When the eggs hatch, the babies emerge with external gills and some fish-like features like fins and a lateral line, an organ that detects vibrations in the water and changes in water pressure. Frogs and toads begin as tadpoles, and as they grow, their legs appear under their gill sacs and their mouths become larger. They start to transition from vegetarian to carnivore, and their intestines lose 75% of their length as a result. They lose their lateral line and instead develop binocular vision, which gives them depth perception. Their tails stay around a bit longer than the rest, but ultimately are lost. Depending on the species, this transition from legless vegetarian swimmers to hopping carnivorous amphibians can take between 2 and 8 months to complete. Some salamanders, like the axolotl, don't undergo a full metamorphosis and stay in their aquatic form instead, retaining their external gills throughout their lives.
Amphibian metamorphosis is controlled by a single hormone called thyroxine, and we still really don't know how it works.
This single hormone tells tail muscles to die, tells limbs to grow, tells intestines to shrink, and makes lateral lines completely disappear.
All that from a single hormone.
I'd like to know more about different kinds of hormones.
Some species of fish also undergo metamorphosis controlled by thyroxine, though not nearly as many fish metamorphosize as insects, as their environment doesn't change all that much.
That said, the fish that do change their strategies as they mature.
Flatfish are born symmetrical and swim around like regular fish, but as they age, their eyes slowly start migrating to one side of their head so that they can eventually stop swimming and spend the rest of their lives on the ocean floor. Eels have 4 stages of metamorphosis, and their larvae are hands down the most mesmerizing larvae in the animal kingdom. In some species, they can stay at this stage for over 2 years, looking for nutrients as they grow and develop.
Salmon undergo metamorphosis because they are anadromous.
They battle their way upstream against swift currents, seeking quiet waters where they may spawn.
Their lives begin in freshwater. Then they go out to sea, and finally they return to freshwater to spawn and die. They start out as alevins. During this stage, they survive off a yolk sac that is attached to them out of the egg. When they finish the yolk, they swim to the surface, fill their swim bladders with oxygen, and begin to look for food. In this stage, they're called fries. As the fries migrate to the ocean, they get larger, grow scales, and turn silver.
They mature in the ocean before returning to the stream from whence they came.
They stop eating and begin to make the struggle upstream. Once they've reached their destination, the males develop a hooked nose to fight each other for mating rights.
After they spawn, they die. Metamorphosis is how most things on this planet get by, yet despite this, it's far too fantastical to describe it as common.
The astonishing change that takes place in this phase of the life cycle is known as metamorphosis.
I'm new around here, so I thought I would take a really quick second to introduce myself a little bit more. I'm Jess Keating, and yes, I get just kidding all the time. I'm a zoologist, illustrator, and author. I've written 8 children's books so far, with 5 more on the way, all about science, nature, animals, and badass women in STEM, and I'm so happy to be hosting Animalogic's Second Nature along with Danielle. One question I get all the time is, what's the secret to writing? The bad news is, there is no secret. It just takes a lot of practice. You just need to keep writing. And if you're having trouble getting started, a great place that I found to get motivation, as well as tips, tricks, and insights from professional authors, is Skillshare.
One of the best writing courses I've seen on Skillshare is Storytelling 101. Created by Danielle Jose Older, a New York Times best-selling author, this very well-produced course will leave you with a framework for writing your own fictional short story. Whether you're just starting out or you've been writing for years, this course is meant to help you hone your skills, focus your storytelling, and inspire you to put pen to paper. It's quick, fun, and has given me some great strategies for helping me deal with writer's block. Skillshare is an online learning community with over 25,000 classes in writing, illustration, production, and a whole lot more. Premium membership gives you unlimited access to high-quality classes on must-know topics, so you can improve your skills, unlock new opportunities, and do the work you love. Join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare today with a special offer just for Animalogic fans: 2 months of Skillshare for free. To sign up, go to the link in the description, and the first 500 visitors will get 2 months of unlimited access to over 25,000 classes, all for free. Act now for the special offer and start writing today.
So what should we talk about next? Please let us know in the comments down below, and do not forget to subscribe for new episodes of Animalogic Second Nature every other week. Thank you so much for watching.
The principles of growth and development we've seen in this film apply to all human beings. Now let's begin our discussion by answering the first question from the preview committee. Who can tell us when human growth begins?